Can you guys hear me? This is cool? Excellent. So, what do you guys want to talk about? I have no slides prepared, so this is the only slide. Just like quick poll, how many responsive web design fans do we have? Cool. How many people have actually coded up a responsive design? Same number. Crap. So this is, I wanted to talk about environmental design on the web today. And environmental design is not typically associated with the web, but it's been around for a long time. I think it was around 1940 where we started this, this concept of addressing environmental parameters when we start making buildings or doing policies or anything. And there's all this stuff that you need to take into account. And I think it maps very closely to the web, and more specifically, I guess this garbage now device that's for us. So I'm Tim from Fresh Tilled Soil. And you might be thinking, what is Fresh Tilled Soil? Well, don't have it in my notes, crap. Yes, I do. We're a consultancy. We help businesses build up their web presence and mobile applications and whatnot. We do consulting events like this, and we do some training, which is awesome training. We're amping that up really soon. You can see we work with awesome clients. I mean, big clients, small clients, doesn't matter. What we're interested in is creating a great user experience overall, every project, no matter what. The goal is great user experience, happy clients, happy users, whatnot. And because we're into this great UX, it gets me thinking, when we're working on projects, how can we make this user experience better? And it's always number one in my brain. So this is where I kind of started thinking about responsive design and how we can make things better and where we've been and where we're going. And today I wanted to go over a little bit about where we came from, a little history. It's not a ton of history. Some of you might already know it, but it'll help get everybody on the same page. Where we are right now, where we're going based on where we've come from, and what we need to get there. We can't do this just by ourselves sitting in a room making up interesting code that doesn't work anywhere. We can, but that's not helpful. So the goals, by the time we get done here, I'd like everyone to understand why so many people have chosen responsive design. I know right now it's kind of the way we do things, but it's important to know how we got there and why we chose this path. So when something new and awesome comes along, you don't just abandon what we've been doing. We have reasons where we got where we are. And I also, I want to show that responsive design is really awesome, but it's only this really small piece of the pie. And there's so much more we can do when we start tacking on environmental factors to it. I also want to show that there are dynamic and static design conditions. It's kind of a weird thing, but we'll get to it, and hopefully by the end we'll be able to see that there are some static things, and there's some things that change every time, and we can craft around these to make a better user experience. I didn't see all these movies. I'm sorry. Oh, crap. I lost my thing. Oh, my time machine's trying to do a backup right now. Where are we? No. There we go. I haven't done a time machine backup in like 6 months. I'm gonna lose all this data. So where we came from, way, way back in the dawn of time, 95, 96, we started out with progressive enhancement. And we came to it with this attitude of we have a structure layer with our HTML, and on top of that, we put our styles and CSS, and then we have a behavior layer, which is typically for the JavaScript. And we stick with this model. It's important to know that we came from there because everything circles back to progressive enhancement, even in the advanced stuff in responsive design. And we were all coding nice and happy in our our browsers. We were miserable in IE 5.5 and 6, but you know, Mozilla 3.6 came out, and we were real happy. And then the iPhone came and ruined everybody's life. And they started up this debate, which is it's not as big of a debate right now because we've evolved a little bit beyond it. But there's still a lot to be said about this specifically. And a lot of things happened when we started discussing, we started arguing back and forth. People had iPhones and everyone wants to be cool and everyone wants an iPhone app, but it's not necessarily the way to go all the time. There are some cases to do a native application, there are some cases to do a web application. We discovered a lot of problems with them. I personally have not discovered a ton of problems with the iPhone Android method because I don't code for those very often. There's obviously a scalability issue. You can only target for the devices, and as more devices come in, you need more things. But my focus was primarily on the mobile web way back 5 years ago, my solid days. And we ran into a lot of problems. It's not scalable. It's not scalable from, like, tons of people can come to it. That's not the problem. The problem is when you have multiple applications. I was working at a university in Southern California like 5 years ago, and we were one of the first universities to do a big mobile push. Well, what we discovered was this was awesome. We could target these devices directly. We have to hook up a bunch of stuff on the server, and we build out these smaller versions of the websites that they basically look like iPhone apps, which is, looking back on it, really stupid. But when you're at a big organization like a university, everybody wants a mobile version of their website. And all of a sudden you have one website to manage, and now that has a mobile version, and you have two. And when you scale that up, you have 2, you have 4, 8, whatever 8 times 2 is, 16, 32, 64, 128. It just gets ridiculous, and it doubles all of your maintenance and all of your work and all of your design load, and you need more people to manage all this stuff, and it just didn't work. And while I was there, we also discovered another problem with the way we were doing user agent sniffing. Typically, the way you do that split off to a mobile site is you detect for the user agent, and you look for this specific string of text, whether it's iPhone or Android or BlackBerry or Palm Pre or whatever. And you have this massive list of devices, and it just grows and grows and grows as these new devices come into play. And one day I was sitting in my cubicle, and we started getting a lot of support calls, people saying, oh, I'm going to the website and it's forwarding me to the mobile for some reason. I don't understand why. Like, it's happened over and over again. And we cracked the detection script open, we looked at the strings, and everything looked fine. Come to find out, they were visiting the site in Opera, and the Opera rendering engine is Presto, so the user agent spits out the word Presto. And the problem with that was we were also detecting for the Palm Pre at the time. We don't do it anymore. But so it thought you were coming in a Palm Pre, and it just was kicking you over to the mobile site, and you couldn't switch back. And it was terrible. And that was my breaking point with this garbage of server-side detection for mobiles. It was just, we had so many problems, and that was the point where I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is stupid. There has to be a better way. We came to this realization that browsers are always going to be behind devices, no matter what. You know, the Apple controls what you can do in an app, and they want to push the limits. They can push the limits. They can change stuff whenever. On the web, we have all these browsers we need to worry about, and none of them are synced up. They all suck. There's so much more to take into account. But it's okay that we're behind these devices, because we can learn from them. We can see what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right. We can take tips. We can, a lot of the time, like what we're doing now, we're seeing what's really cool on a device. Like, oh, you can access a camera. I want to be able to do that in the browser. And then we build an API that accesses the camera. There's a lot of garbage on the phones, too, that you don't need. But, you know, when we don't have to put that in the web. So we can learn from all this stuff. So, you know, we'll always be behind devices, and that's okay, said the loser. You know, we've lost. It's okay, but, you know. But after we accepted that, It's a terrible graphic. But you know, the only way to succeed is not worry about what everyone else is doing. And I think that's really true. To an extent, we're not worried what they're doing on the native applications, but we're watching it. We can see these interactions that they're building. But we know that we're dealing in a completely different ballpark. So once we grabbed onto this, we grabbed onto this. This is not the web. This is not the web. It's an iPhone 5. I updated it a couple days ago. But we know that this is not the web. These are devices. They have their own applications. You know, a MacBook Air doesn't run the same applications always as a Windows PC. They're just different. They have different operating systems. But what we also found out was this is the web. And credit where credit's due. Stole this from Brad Frost. But this is the web. This is what the snapshot of the web looks like, even with the Motorola Razr up there. You access the device, you access the internet from all these devices, and it doesn't matter that you're on an iPad or you're on a TV or you're on a laptop or you're on, I think that's an Apple IIe. It doesn't matter where you're coming from, because we're just building this imaginary thing online, and we don't care how you access it. We just want you to be able to access it. We're not these stuck-up people where you need to have a nice phone. We don't care. We'll take everybody. And this is one of the guiding principles of responsive design. I love responsive design. I'll say it. When, you know, this is what saved me from those server-side detection scripts that just were endlessly frustrating. You get to have one code base, solve so many problems. I like it because it's CSS centered. You know, its base is in media queries, which I really like. It came out in CSS3. It's just a combination of the media queries and a flexible layout. We've had flexible layouts for a long time. This isn't something new. But what we didn't have until a few years ago were support for these media queries. And it also falls back to progressive enhancement, which I also love. And let me tell you why. So, progressive enhancement, you've heard this before. Progressive enhancement, structure, presentation, behavior. Okay? So what we were doing when we were splitting off into a separate mobile site is we were changing the design at the structure layer. We're completely branching off to a new set of HTML and redefining all that stuff. And what we were really doing a lot of the times is changing the design. The design lives at the presentation layer. This is where the design lives. This is why we're going to use this, because it doesn't affect the structure. The content is still there, and then you put the design on top of it. This is exactly where it should live. All we're doing is changing the design. If you need to actually change the structure, then by all means, you know, branch off. But a lot of the times what we're doing to these applications is only changing the design. And when we're doing that, once that clicks in our head, oh my God, all I'm doing is changing the design. I can do that in CSS. We have media queries. You save yourself so many headaches. And I love it. I know, right? Who said that? It's adorable. That kind of brings us up to speed about where we are right now. We're currently in the responses. Do you want me to leave it up for longer? Yeah. A couple more? Okay. This brings us to where we are right now. Can I change it? Yeah. Okay. And generally speaking, we can kind of agree that this is the snapshot of where we currently are. As front-end folks, maybe we don't deal with the data source that often other than consuming it, but generally speaking, you have this data source. It's either an API, hopefully it's an API, or it's a database, or whatever. Maybe the database sits above it. But we have this split coming off of it, and maybe you have your iOS and your Android app, and it's totally cool if you have that. But then, and this stuff is very specialized for its area, and then everything else gets dumped into this garbage pail on the right, called the web. And when we zoom into that, it's still even split into mobile web and responsive design. But what's happening is something really interesting when we're talking about mobile first approach. You're getting something more like this, where we're starting down here and we're moving over to there. And that's the mobile first approach. Now, there are, of course, cases when you need to do the mobile web. I'm not saying that this is totally bad, but where I think this falls short is when you're starting to do responsive applications. I haven't seen a whole lot of responsive applications. There's some things in like Gmail, it does respond a little bit, but to go from large screen all the way down to small screen, you don't really see that very often. And we're not quite there yet. We can totally do it. It's just CSS and JavaScript, and just all about asset management at that point. So there were a lot of problems that responsive design addressed when we're talking about mobile web versus responsive design. It made us think, is this site really mobile? Like I mentioned before, if all we're doing is changing the design, what's the big deal? I mean, what's mobile about this site? There's really nothing mobile about it. Just because you're viewing it on a phone doesn't make it a mobile site. It doesn't have to be mobile. I can visit anything on this phone. It can be designed for it or not. It doesn't matter. But responsive design made us think about that so we can use responsive design. We now have one code base to worry about. We don't have that two code base split, the two structure layers. We don't need that anymore. So we have less maintenance. There's no more switching mechanism that when you're over here, and because you've removed features for your little mobile site that people actually want, you have to build in this switching mechanism to go back and forth. And there's a lot of overhead with that switching mechanism. If you don't remove features and content, you don't have to put in that switching mechanism because it's all there. It doesn't matter necessarily what it looks like. And there's been some talk lately about a responsive switch to bring you back to the big layout. I'm not really for that. I mean, the people, they don't care about your design. I mean, they care about the experience, but really they don't care about that your header's blue or that your logo's small or something. What they're there for is the content. And if you don't remove content and features, you don't need that switch. It makes you ask what's important. If something's important at a large screen, it's going to be important on a small screen. So again, we're not removing features from this stuff. It optimizes for flexibility. Love that. We're talking about widths and not devices anymore. So when we're back here again, we're targeting specific devices. Over here, we're targeting widths. We don't care if you're on an iPhone or an Android or a tablet or a Kindle or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just screen size that counts because we're changing the design based on that width. And it creates a natural breakpoint where you're not saying, my mobile site is going to be 320 pixels wide, or I'm going to target landscape or portrait. You're just resizing a browser, seeing where the design gets messed up, inserting a breakpoint at maybe it's at 600, 700 pixels that you need to adjust things, and you do it. And it's a much more fluid way to build a site. And I think it's better for the users too, even if you have to create a bunch of different breakpoints. So responsive design solved a lot of problems for me, at least. If anyone disagrees that it solved nothing, by all means. I'd be interested to find out some more problems that they solve, problems you still have. But there are also a lot of problems that responsive design exposed. And as a jerk, this is where I like to be. This is where problem solvers really like to live. There's this great thing, responsive design, and we start using it, and then we notice the shortcomings of it, and we try to make it better. This is where I like to be. When we realize that responsive design is not the holy grail for mobile, that's a big moment. And in the office, when I bring up stuff like that at Fresh Tilled Soil, you would think that's a good thing. That is actually the King Buzzkill crown. that I have earned in the office for bringing up problems that responsive design has. We have some folks from the office here that can, it is a King Buzzkill crown. I wear it proudly. But a lot of these problems with responsive design have to do with asset management. Does anybody, when you're building responsive design, have anyone run into problems with images? Never. Never had a problem with an image. I want to hang out with you. But any sort of assets have been a problem. And there's also problems with the retina displays in these designs, because we have these awesome devices with high-def screens, and you want to use really awesome graphics, but they're enormous, and you can't use them, because if you want to use them at one level, you got to use them at this level when everything is constrained. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work from a management perspective. And some ways that we addressed that, we started going vector designs. If you notice, a lot of the stuff on the iPad has gone vector, and that's to address the weight issue. They're very fast. They render very quickly in the browser. But these huge images, if you're not using vector, I don't feel like you should have to change your design to accommodate responsive design. You should be able to design whatever you want, and it should be able to fit your process. You shouldn't have to shoehorn something you're doing into this. So you want to keep using those big images, but they take so long to load on these devices that are constrained bandwidths. And you're like, I don't know, what do you do? Is that the point where you branch off to a separate mobile site because you just can't handle the page weight? I don't know. I don't think so. Has anybody tried the picture element? Someone has got to try the picture element. Okay. Well, it was the picture fill at first, and it's a way to load images in a responsive manner. It's completely dependent on JavaScript. It's a new element. It doesn't actually exist other than in JavaScript, but it's working its way into the specification right now because it is a decent way to do it. And what you do is you have a picture element. It works very similar to a media element in HTML5. So a picture, wrapper, alt text, and then you have these source images that are flagged with a media attribute for a screen, a window width. And it will actually load in a smaller image as you step down the browser width. It's very cool. And if I knew that no one knew it, I would have had a link to it. I apologize. I'll send a link out in the Meetup comments to this. But it is dependent on JavaScript. So I'm looking at this, and I think this is awesome. But what I'm concerned with in a responsive design is not so much that when I'm on a 400 pixel wide window that I get a smaller image, because a lot of times I'm on my phone at home and I have a Wi-Fi connection and I don't need that smaller image. I want that high resolution image. So I'm thinking, what about bandwidth and connection speed, where this falls a little bit short? And once again, I retain my crown for King Buzzkill. All these problems are performance-based, really, right now with responsive design, and this is one of the issues with asset management. We're trying to solve it by just loading in a smaller image. I think it's good. It's not perfect. There's some ways so we can responsibly craft a user experience when we're dealing with these asset management problems. We can use JavaScript to not use images that we don't need. Using JavaScript for polyfills, like the picture element, to do some certain things. We have some constraints from the browser, some constraints from the device, a lot of constraints from the bandwidth. There are a lot of things we can do, and one of the major things we can do when we're stepping towards this environmental design is feature detection. Is anyone familiar with feature detection? And Ryan is. And Modernizer. Anyone use Modernizer? Excellent. Okay. So this is a step in the right direction. So we're using responsive design and something like Modernizer, maybe not specifically Modernizer, but some form of feature detection. And we can use feature detection for graceful degradation, where if we're using CSS gradients and we want to have a fallback, you may use an image, you can detect for that, or rounded corners, or SVG support. If SVG is not supported, load in a PNG. There's all sorts of things for graceful degradation that we can do to make sure things work in the browsers. But there's also feature detection from an interface design perspective, where you can detect for things like touch capabilities. If I'm building an interface, a responsive interface that I want to work well on the phone, what I'm concerned with at this level is that it's a small screen, and that's where the design changes come in. But there's also interaction changes, because I can touch this screen and I can interact with it with my finger, and I don't have the capability to hover. So I want to write all these touch interactions, but I don't want to load those touch interactions unless I need them, and that's where something like Modernizer comes in play. So you can detect for touch, you keep your touch interactions in a separate file, and then when you need it, you go get it with an asynchronous script loading call. And then you can start using all this stuff. So this is a way that you can sort of manage the assets without bogging down anything. Not as cute? Okay. He's sitting in a suitcase. So feature detection and Modernizer starts to push us in this direction that I think we're going, and where we're starting to be more aware of the environment. And we all want to create this elite user experience that's memorable, sometimes invisible, but always great. And we need to constantly analyze our processes, what we're doing, and specifically what we're doing with responsive design. What is it actually targeting? It's targeting we talked about this, it's targeting there's a lot of things that it targets actually. So here they are. But there's aspect ratio, height and width is the most common when we're targeting the window size, maybe max width, min width. Orientation, you can do portrait and landscape. Resolution is a way to target retina directly. And touch enabled is a new one from Firefox that I just found a couple days ago. So that was kind of neat. But there's all these things, but these are all static design conditions, what I talked about way in the beginning of this. These are all static. These really don't change from page load to page load, or it'll change from, I'm on my phone, I'm on my laptop, on my iPad, it'll change there. But by and large, they don't change. They're always there. But there are so many other things that we need to consider. There's these static ones, and there's a lot of stuff that changes every single page load. And I think the key to that is breaking out of this device. That we don't have to keep our experience completely inside of this. There is a lot more stuff going on. Maybe I'm walking down the street. We had this kind of evolution in web development, where initially we're stuck in the browser and we can't do anything outside of the browser, and then we pushed a little further, and then we got stuck inside the device. And we broke out of it a little bit with geolocation. A few years ago, geolocation came out, and we could use it. Well, we could always use it, detecting IPs. But it's not the HTML5 spec, but it got broken out. But it's on its own specification. But geolocation was the first time we actually broke out of the device, and we took some environmental factors into account. And I thought that was really cool, but it kind of stopped. We had geolocation, then HTML5 blew up, and it was awesome, and still is awesome. And then we didn't really do a whole lot more beyond that. So, has anybody here gone to a website and it just white screen, white screen, white screen, and it just hangs and hangs and hangs? Does that ever happen? What do you do when that happens? Turn off, what else do you do? Not turn off the machine. Throw it against the wall.
You hit refresh and then you hit back.
Hit refresh. Why do you hit refresh? Give it another shot. You think the connection could be different? Maybe you refresh it and then you just catch the connection.
Right. So sometimes when you refresh, you'll read it. You might have better luck with the WebGL or whatever it is.
Okay, so I'm going to call that connection. So we refresh it because we think the internet's going to be better or something the next time you refresh the page. It's true. I mean, it's something that changes every single page load. And there are other things that change every single page load. And we can craft an experience around those each time. And those are the dynamic things, the dynamic design conditions. So I really think that the holistic user experience exists outside of this device. And we need to get out of it to take it to the next level. Environmental design. Oh, that was a long journey to get here. But environmental design boils down to two main principles. The real world exists, and you can't control it. And that's okay. It's not just screen size. It's not just portrait and landscape. It's also sitting at home, texting while you're driving. If it's dark outside, these are all environmental factors that you can tie into to create a better experience. A lot of things can change. I mentioned connection, your signal strength on your phone. It can go, here I have a really good signal strength, but maybe I'm tied up in someone's basement in Chinatown. I don't have a good cell connection. So I want a different experience on my phone when that happens. If I want to check my email. My battery can be low. If I'm lost in the woods and I have a crappy connection and a low battery, I don't want your retina images downloaded on my phone. Now, these are things that can all take into account in your experience. So enter the web API and boot to Gecko. I felt like that was an advertisement. It wasn't. So boot to Gecko is very similar to Chrome OS. Has anyone used Chrome OS? It came out a few years ago. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's very similar. It's an operating system that Mozilla is building or has built there. It's a little gray if it's finished right now. But what they're doing that they're creating these APIs that, because the whole operating system is in the browser, you need to access the device directly from the browser. And what they're doing that Google did not do is they're working with the W3C to create the web API, which is awesome, because they're not just keeping it to themselves. So when HTML5 came along, this is sort of HTML5-ish, I guess, buzzwordy. Everything in HTML5 we could already do, pretty much. We could geolocate stuff. We could store in the browser in the form of cookies, and they just formalized it in local storage. We could, I guess, if you could say that we could do WebSockets, but it was more Ajax. We could communicate with, we could communicate with the server. All that stuff, almost all of it, we could already do. And with this, instead of doing stuff that we could do on the server and then pulling into JavaScript, we're now looking at stuff that we can do on the native platforms and pulling them into the browser. And that's where Web API goes. And I feel like it goes a little bit further than that. So we caught up to the server on the front end, and then we're now catching up to the device on the front end, and then we're going to just blow right past them. It's going to be amazing. This is just a snapshot of the Web API. Some of them, as you can see, are my shadow in there. W3C, W3C, W3C. Those are where Mozilla is directly working with the W3C to formalize the specifications. And I'm going to go through briefly all of these. You can see that this is desktop Firefox, Android Firefox, and boot to Gecko. So some of the stuff doesn't quite make sense on desktops. They're not doing it. Like the vibration API on your desktop. That'd be cool, but I guess. But we have things like the idle API, which I think is super cool. You can tell when a user's been idle for X amount of seconds. And we're going to show some actual code from this stuff, so just to prove that I'm not making it up. So with the idle API, I've been trying to find a way for it to map directly to user experience, but it's more, you can save your own servers with the idle API. If you're doing some like really intense polling, and you can check if somebody's been idle for a long time, you can stop polling, and you can just save your servers until it comes active again. And the idle API is tab to tab in Firefox. So you have one tab open, like I have Gmail open in one and maybe Facebook open in the other, and I'm interacting with Facebook, and Gmail goes idle until I come back to the tab. So they're all siloed off. There are some security issues with it that they're trying to work out right now. If you open one tab in regular mode and one in incognito mode, or whatever it's called, private browsing, they're trying to work out. You're not supposed to be able to find when someone is not idle anymore if you're in private browsing mode on one tab and not on the other. It's kind of a weird thing, but they're still working it out, but it's a very cool API, and we'll look at some of the code. The vibration API, it's exactly what it sounds like. You can vibrate the device, and it's in Android right now. Ambient light, I think, is very cool. So this is it's dark outside. Maybe I need to brighten the screen a little bit for my users. And the thing with these is the device does have to have a light sensor in it, whether it's the camera or it's a separate sensor. But it's very cool, and you can modify in different forms of light. Proximity sensor is NFC from the browser, not specifically NFC because they don't want to tie themselves to the technology, but your phone has a proximity sensor, and you can from the browser just go up to something that's NFC enabled right now. The thing with the proximity sensor, I was reading through the W3C specification, and you can tell distance from an object fairly accurately with it, but they don't recommend doing it because there's a lot of things that can interfere with the proximity sensor on the phone. There's electromagnetic fields can mess it up, temperature, chemical composition. There's a lot of stuff in the actual object that can mess with the sensor. So they don't recommend doing it reliably, but I feel like you could probably do it. And then there's also battery, which is very active. This is one of the oldest ones right now. They've been working on it for a very long time. I think they're in draft 24 at this point of the battery API. And battery API gives you a lot of information. You can tell when it's charging, when it's discharging, the actual level of the battery. And this is the way, like I'm trapped in someone's basement and my battery's low. And I visit your website, I won't get these ridiculous images I need to download and chew up my battery life. And then there's also mobile connection and network information. Mobile connection is awesome. Network information is kind of lame, but this is the one that W3C hooked onto. And the mobile connection will actually give you signal strength. And right now it's only in boot to Gecko. I'm not sure why it's not getting an Android, but you can actually get a 0 to 10 number for signal strength. And network connection, you get the type of connection. You can tell if you're on Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, Edge, I guess, the other one. So you can modify your experience based on that. So proof I'm not making it up. This exists. This is the idle API. Right now it has three methods in it. Time in seconds. On idle is a new event, and on active. So you can tell when somebody goes idle after 4 seconds, tell them they're boring, And when they come back active, they're awesome again. And what I found kind of strange about this is you get a new listener called add idle observer. And typically when writing JavaScript like this, it's an event listener. But it's kind of weird because when you hook up a click event to something, you're listening for a specific thing. And here you're listening for the lack of something. So I think that's why it's probably different. It's just like I'm waiting for you to do nothing sort of a thing. And this is how you can, if you're polling a server on idle, stop polling. On active, start polling again, and then you start pulling information in, and you save some server load. Vibration API. This has been around for a very long time. I actually gave a talk about a year or a year and a half ago that involved the vibration API, and they haven't changed the specification. They're on draft 6. The latest draft was September of 2012, so they're still actively working on it. And it takes anywhere from 1 to infinity, an array of parameters. And the way it goes is the length of the first vibration, how much you wait, and then another vibration. And what I found funny about this is it doesn't seem like there's any limitation on the numbers you can put in there and how many numbers you can put in there. So you could just vibrate somebody's phone like crazy. This could be the new blink tag right here. Cutting edge. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that they didn't put any restrictions on it. The ambient light sensor API. An event listener, you get a new event called device light or on device light. And when the light changes, it's in lux units, which is an international measure of an intensity as perceived by the human eye. I couldn't memorize it, so I put it in the speaker notes. But a lux unit is just unit, like pixel, M, whatever. That's how we measure light. So when the light changes, you can grab the value. And right now, that's all you get. You just get the value. So value goes up, the light gets brighter. Value goes down, it gets dimmer. And you can adjust your interface accordingly as that happens. Proximity sensor. Another event listener. You get device proximity, which means that the thing is near you. They're currently on draft 12 of this specification. The last one was written in July. So it's what is this month? What is this month? Somebody? So, October, okay. So it was a little while ago. And what you get back with this event is the minimum distance for the device. So say something can't be any closer than 1 inch or 1 centimeter from the device, and the max, so maybe 20 centimeters. 20 centimeters. So you get that from the information from the device itself, and then it returns the value. So this is just saying if it's in the range. Tell me that the object is this many centimeters away. And the device does have to have a proximity sensor. So hip cool iPhone will not work because there's not a proximity sensor. But I wanted to focus on battery and connection because I think this is where the most of the work in environmentally designing your interface is. There's obviously, there's a lot of stuff in the environment, not vibration, but the light and proximity to things, but the specific examples of ways to control your assets when you're building out your interface based on things that are outside of the device. And battery and connection is really where that lives. In the navigator object is where the battery lives. The battery API lives. You can get, like I mentioned, you can get a true-false indication of whether it's charging. You can get how many seconds until it's fully charged, how many seconds until the battery is drained, and the level is 0 to 10. And you get new events, so you can actually check when it's charging. You can't, this is just a snapshot, but you can actually get all that information about when it's charging. So so when I'm tied up in that person's basement, if I find a plug, you can tell that I'm charging my phone and maybe give me more assets. Give me the entire 911 phone number instead of the first digit. But there's a lot of things you can do. Now, that being said, all these great APIs that you're going to be using to design this holistic experience all rely on JavaScript. Does anybody subscribe to the what? What do you subscribe to?
Are you going to talk about how you want web pages to work without JavaScript?
Yes. Does anybody subscribe to that everything should work without JavaScript? Okay. So, not many, surprising. I do subscribe to that. But it comes to a point where we need to look at we always need to look at what we're doing. And progressive enhancement says structure, presentation, behavior. And it doesn't really say HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We just map it to that because it's a fairly direct thing. But if you really look at it, they don't actually mention HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So you have to get to a point where you want to build these interfaces, and can you rely on JavaScript all the time? I don't know. Does anyone think you can rely on JavaScript all the time now? You can say it. It's okay. What's that? That's good. That's surprising. But there's,
you can rely on it because if you use Google Analytics, then those people don't exist anyway.
It's true. Yeah, I think there's critical information that your site has, and that should always be available, the critical content. If you can, I don't know, I mean, I guess then you have to decide if some content's not critical, then why is it even there? But, at some point you do need to make the decision, if you're doing something like this, to rely on JavaScript or to not rely on JavaScript. You could even use a no script tag to dump out bigger images. Like if you're doing some asset management for your images and you're detecting connection and battery, you can always dump a big image into this no script. I don't actually know if it'll fire off the request or not. Does anyone? Yeah. But you can build in fallbacks for this stuff. Chances are everyone's going to have JavaScript enabled. But if you're like me and you do want that content available all the time, you kind of have to make the decision, if I'm going to use this stuff, how can I use it responsibly?
Not all thumbnailers and web crawlers have JavaScript enabled. So if you want your show up and not look like Java, it should at least look okay on there.
So there's SEO value. Okay. So when you're crafting these user experiences, a while ago we decided that designs don't have to look the same in IE7 as they do in latest version of Chrome. There can be some discrepancies. They don't even have to look the same between Chrome and Firefox. We try to make them look very similar. But we made a decision that websites don't have to look the same in every browser. And I would argue that the experience doesn't have to be the same in every browser either. Even if you're talking, obviously this experience is going to be different than the laptop. But you can change the experience based on all these dynamic factors every time the page loads. It doesn't have to be consistent. It just be custom for that individual at that time. And I think that's really the key to making a great user experience. You can fight the chaos. You can pull your hair out trying to make sure your baseline grids in responsive design are consistent. You can make sure your padding is exact and everything, but in the long run, in creating a great user experience, it's not a good experience for you personally, building stuff like that. You're a person too, right? Even though you're developers and designers. But embracing the chaos in the browser and not fighting it, I think, is a big key to moving things forward and not driving us crazy. So what do we need to get there? Anybody recognize this? Miracle on Ice. Yes, it's the U.S. hockey team. Yes, there's a movie about that. What do we need to get there? Obviously, we need community support, folks like you. We need the W3C, but not really. I mean, we kind of need them, but is anyone from the W3C here? Okay, I'm in it, but they're slow. And really, they're just a central thing to look at. I mean, they're good to have as guidance, but really it's about the browsers that implement them. It's about the community to push them. And it's about us using this information freely so we can craft these user experiences to the greatest they can be. And to an extent, when we start using all these things and they start becoming active and everything, it comes to a point where we need to turn on our own moral compasses and decide what information we can use and what information we shouldn't use. Don't be creepy with this stuff. I know, she's creepy as hell. There's a lot of stuff in these new APIs, and they're really powerful. There's a contacts API where you can access somebody's contacts. You can access their call log. And don't be the guy who codes or girl who codes something that looks into somebody's call log, hooks up with their Facebook page, sees who their wife is, and say, oh, I notice you haven't been calling your wife. Are you cheating on her? Don't be that guy. Or you notice you're emailing a psychiatrist and then offer them ads for free drugs. There's this moral compass that we need to keep ourselves to, where user experience is the most important thing, even if you're not making as much money as you possibly can. So yeah, I'm saying like cool stuff, but can we use any of it right now? Sort of. We can sort of use it. There's more than just these APIs in the environmental design concept. There's obviously people using them right now. You can use location and weather. If you're building a shopping site, you can use location and weather. Say, oh, I'm in Boston, it's cold right now. Maybe put some coats up. You can do things like that. Really targeted user experience. And we can do that right now. It's not that difficult. But it doesn't have to stop at the device. There are people doing these sort of things right now, not with the APIs in particular, but anyone have Netflix? Someone has Netflix, come on. When you first, you load up your movie and you see the 3 dots and it's loading and it's testing your connection. And if you have a proper connection, it'll feed you the HD video. If you don't, it'll degrade it a little bit. It's all to keep the experience good. And Amazon does the same thing. When I was living in California a few years ago, True Grit came out on instant video, and I wanted to watch it because I liked that movie. And I wanted to watch it in HD for some reason. And I was watching it, and about 10 minutes in, the connection started buffering, and I was getting frustrated. And then it actually asked me if I wanted to switch to the non-HD version. And I'm like, no, I want the HD version. So I continued the video, and 10 minutes later, it came up again, and I said no. And then, the connection was choppy. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I want that thing to come up again. Where is it? So I can switch over. And I just had enough of this crap. So I eventually switched over. It came up again, and I switched over to the standard. I just continued watching, and it was a much better experience, even though I didn't get the HD video. And it was a lot better. And little pro tip, they refunded all my money for that purchase because I switched over. So go for the HD one and then hope that it messes up, and then you get a free video. But the goal here is to create the best user experience possible, even if you're not watching the HD stuff. And we can do that online as well. But always remember user experience. there are ways to push the limits of user experience in everything you do. Even if you're building ads, you know, you can build ads so good that people don't want to block them. No, you can't. We did one of my first projects at Fresh Tilled Soil was this. It was for credit.com, and it was a sidebar widget ad. And I remember building this, and I was thinking like, wow, this is like a ridiculously awesome ad. But you don't just click anywhere and it takes you off. You can, you know, this is a slider. You adjust your credit score, and it shows you, you know, the different loans you can get and everything. And it was a great ad. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I wonder if people are actually going to click on it because and you can interact with this whole thing, and it's unusual. But this was absolutely the greatest user experience I have ever seen in an ad. And you can go to their credit.com/blog and see it. It's in the sidebar. I haven't seen it anywhere else in the wild, but it was awesome. And you know, we can push the limits of stuff even in advertising. It's a weird concept to have a useful ad, but you know, you can take these concepts of whatever you want to call it, responsive design plus or environmental or whatever, but it all boils down to making a better user experience. And that's kind of where we are. So we talked about the journey from responsive to mobile to responsive, some responsive problems, things that responsive design addressed, and then some problems that it brought to light. We've talked about ways to respond to your environment outside of the device, and then some ways to get help with the future. There's some more resources. I'll get out the slides. You don't have to furiously write down these links. But Boot to Gecko, Web API, all this stuff. There's actually a demo of the device light sensor that somebody built, which is really great. arewemobileyet.com is back to Boot to Gecko. It'll tell you, it's a really cool interface. It'll tell you about all the features. This is one of the weirdest resources that I've ever put up on a slide. It's the console log. A lot of these new things are in the Navigator object, and if you're really familiar with JavaScript, you can do a console log for Navigator, and it spits out all this stuff. And here you see get battery, and Navigator is where they put all of this new stuff. So you can get it before everyone else if you do a console log on Navigator, on the Navigator object. So if you enjoyed all this content, I do have a podcast, a weekly podcast I do with Steve back there. We usually release it on Monday, and you can get it at FreshTilledSoil/TheDirt. You can follow us on Twitter also, Dirt Show. You can hear more of my rantings. We try to keep it clean. We don't always, though. Ah, yes. We also, at Fresh Tilled Soil, we have an apprenticeship program. The apprentices are here, guys. So there are apprentices waving. It's a 90-day program where we teach UX to people, and all we ask you to do is come hang out with us for 90 days. You get paid, and we teach UX. It's really great. Is it good? See, it's great. They have to say that. Right? I also wrote a book called Learning JavaScript, and I have one. Does anybody want it? I thought nobody would want it. Honestly, that was terrifying for me. There's also
shiny. Like, how would you not want it?
I have like 40 copies at home. I don't want any of them. Also on Inform IT, if you use the coupon code Wright2740, you can get 35% off on the book. It's also on Amazon for pretty cheap. I think it's like $24 on Amazon. It's totally worth it. And that's really all we have. So if anyone questions? I mean like battery and Good question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you know what you want to do when that happens. I guess it would be a matter of testing if it works or not. Like I know that the combination of bad connection and low battery, or just bad connection, I'm going to want smaller images spit out. So I don't know. I don't know how to test it.
I was going to say that kind of answer that. What you can do is in your unit test, you can just mimic what the actual callback would be, and then just test the response where you expect the response.
Unit test. Thank you.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about ways you can change the experience based on dynamic factors. There's a lot of change there in terms of how they use expectations. I know that X is consistency, not violating your mental model. And it's going to change if I walk outside. It's cold.
Well,
There's a lot of, there's a fine line between like the experience doesn't work at all. Okay, give them a small image because it's just going to be a white screen, or as opposed to going way overboard.
yeah, you definitely have to do it with a fine-tooth comb, and you need to test it out with unit tests. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, you just have to be careful with it. You don't want to destroy the user experience, obviously, or the design. But I think the key to this stuff is serving up the user experience that's really high level. And if that means chopping down some images so people don't bail out of the page, I think that's worth it.
As long as they're with their photos.
What's that?
As long as they're not their photos that they're trying to show off, and suddenly they show up from overhead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the phone specifically, the screen is very small, and you can get a 300 wide image that's pretty small, or you can blow it up to a big retina. So you could still get the whole image, and maybe it's not as sharp as you'd like it, but it'd still be there. I can show pictures of myself running through Boston with no pants on. Everybody wants to see it. There's actually a picture of me licking the Rocky statue in Philadelphia. I have it if anyone wants to see that. Anything else?